Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that warm welcome and for the adaptive and resilient schedule this morning that accommodated a late arrival and an early departure. But I'm just so excited to be here, frankly, and just to see this large room so crowded with folks interested in this topic. Let me just ask for a show of hands. How many people who are here today? Let's start with the DEEP employees. I saw a number of our DEEP staff who are here. Raise your hand. There we go. Okay, terrific. So this tells you why I'm so, as we face this daunting challenge of climate change, why I'm so excited to be working on this, because we have such an incredible team across our agency at DEEP. We cover energy, we cover environmental protection, we cover environmental conservation, and through so many of the things that we have responsibility for, we are working just within our agency in new ways to address the challenges of climate change as we think about how to accommodate siting of large quantities of grid-scale solar without impacting our stormwater requirements, as we think about how to ensure the continued sustainable management of our forests and forest lands all across the state, and their role in terms of a thriving biomass industry, as well as being able to sequester carbon emissions. The list is very, very long. Brian highlighted a few of them. Just internally within our building, how we are starting to adapt our programs and work harder at working together across our diverse programs to deliver the best value for Connecticut taxpayers and for Connecticut communities with our planning. Let me now see a show of hands. How many state employees do we have? How many from various agencies? Phenomenal. So I think what you also see reflected in this audience and up here on the dais here is how state agencies are coming together and now working across agencies. We have so much to do. Governor Lamont has made this such a highlight of his administration. He's directed all of the commissioners to be working hard within our agencies, but working even harder at communicating together, letting each other know what we're doing, and seeking out those opportunities proactively for better coordination and cooperation across our agencies so that we can break down silos and make sure that we're bringing our respective policy priorities together in a holistic approach. And there's nothing that requires that more than the urgent challenge of addressing climate change and adapting to climate change. And so being able to serve at DEEP, but serve with so many terrific commissioners, be able to tackle this topic with our sister agencies across the state is so important. Let me see how many academics we have here. Now, Jim, you mentioned that it may seem easy to tell state agencies what to do, but how could we really address this issue without the great science, the great research that's being done, the insights that are coming from our universities here across the state. We are so, we value so much the information that we're getting from the academic community, whether it's in addressing, developing tools like the SLAM model that are helping us to have actionable science that can inform the planning that we're doing, of the decision making that we're undertaking at state agencies, to everything to engaging behavioral sciences, to understand the psychology of how people how we can effectively communicate to people about these risks, and how we can explain these changes that are happening in the environment in ways that can motivate people to take action. It's so important to have that information coming in. It is one of the greatest challenges, I think, for policymakers in government to look at the how we've always done it approach to exercising our jurisdictional authority and be stretched by the information we're getting from our university partners to adapt our decision making to the latest information that's emerging. And it is challenging information to absorb as we see the pace of these changes in our environment accelerating. But that interaction is so valuable for us to make sure that we're leaning into this challenge. Let me see now a show of hands of any municipal leaders or community leaders that we have here in the room. Fantastic. Wow. Okay, that is tremendous. Lori mentioned her cow town, how much we love our towns. here in Connecticut. I have to admit, I don't come from a cow town, I come from a coal town. I actually grew up in West Virginia. And so where we have, in 4th grade you learn this song where you sing all of the names of the 55 counties in the state of West Virginia. When I got here and I asked people what the song was for the counties in Connecticut, no one understood what I was talking about. 169 is a lot of names to remember, so I can understand why people may not have absorbed that in elementary school. But I have to say that the strength of our municipal leaders and our municipal leadership, I think, is kind of an unfair advantage for Connecticut as we address these challenges of climate change. We are in constant communication directly with our jurisdictional partners at the city and town level who are hearing directly from their communities who have so many jurisdictional tools in their toolbox to help us make great strides in how we're adapting zoning policy, thinking about property tax structures that can incent the right kinds of development, thinking about how we can identify the right locations, brownfields, landfills that can be suitable sites for developing renewables, thinking about transit-oriented development and all of the tools that municipalities have to accelerate that, and thinking about the town level. I mean, what Lori really mentioned is so unique and so important here in Connecticut for addressing this issue, which is when I'm out speaking, when I'm talking to folks, I'm talking to first selectmen, I'm talking to council members, I'm also hearing from folks who are engaged in their local energy task force in their community. These are the folks who are on the ground making tremendous change, being able to speak up about a concern that they have, something that's motivating them to take action in their community, where they're looking to self-organize on their free time, community solar projects or other types of efforts that they're undertaking. People are out there and hungry to take action, and it's that army of local community engagement that is going to be critical to us making the strides that we need to make. And so I think about that a lot as the state agency commissioner about how I can do better. Not just, we spend a lot of time focused on the Capitol, so I'll ask about the legislators in a second, but we need to spend even more time focused on our intergovernmental work and working with municipalities as we think about how to advance really effective policy on climate change. So let me ask now about our legislators. Do we have any legislators in the room today? Okay, great. A little underrepresented when you consider the impact that our General Assembly has already had in giving us the tools that we need to make progress on addressing climate change. Just thinking here in Connecticut, one of our biggest advantages in addressing this challenge is the framework and the foundation that we have had consistently through many years now of recognizing the challenge of climate change and adopting new legislation that can enable us to take action. That's as far back as 1961. We've had a recognition of the need to align residential development in marshes in a way that can protect against hurricane impacts and promote resilience. We have we're celebrating 40 years of the Connecticut Coastal Management Act, which is a really critical foundational piece that Brian talked about a little bit for addressing resilience. Last year, legislators took such an enormous step and passed an act concerning climate change planning and resiliency, which not only raises our ambition on greenhouse gas mitigation goals, but also ensures that we will grapple with the realities of building and planning for a future where sea level rise and climate change is a reality. The laws and policies that we have that we've seen advance through the leadership in the General Assembly is consistent. It's building that foundation. We know that we are going to have strong partners in the legislature moving forward. So many of this past session, for example, on the mitigation side, I think we saw one of the most momentous agendas move forward for procurements for up to 30% of the Connecticut's energy supply from offshore wind, advancing so many really important tools that we need to reduce our carbon emissions. As we see at the federal level, continued debate and inaction and partisan bickering, stalling or producing these fits and starts in terms of being able to advance action on climate change. Connecticut, the land of steady habits, has been really making this a priority on a bipartisan basis for many years now. And that, I think, is going to be so important for our state as we start to see financial markets and others beginning to value climate change preparedness more and more. Some of the headlines just over the week, the weekend, in terms of the Fed having a conference on climate change, seeing the Bank of London starting to recognize the need to price carbon and that incorporate climate change impacts into valuation of assets. This is coming. We are starting to get into the time horizon when climate change impacts are beginning to be reflected in investment priorities, and that will position, that sounds terrifying, but it also means that Connecticut's commitments early to pre-position and future-proof our investments will inure to our economic advantage and really distinguish our state, I believe, over in the years to come. So I want to talk a little bit, I know we have many stakeholders in the group, nonprofits, environmental advocates, so raise your hand if you might fit into one of those groups. Oh, there's more than Rob LaFrance here. Yes, okay. Terrific. So this is also such a strength for us in addressing climate change, is the amount of engagement that we have from a whole diversity of different environmental groups and stakeholder groups that are helping us chart this path as we think about the whole range of different environmental values that we need to protect as we build out more resilient infrastructure. I want to just speak for a moment, since I think at this point probably everyone has had their hand raised, to reflect on what we are doing and give you a little preview of the work that we are going to be undertaking in the next year and a half to 2 years that I want every single person who raised a hand to be engaged in. And that is through the Governor's Council on Climate Change. In September of this year, Governor Lamont joined us at our headquarters at DEEP and signed an executive order, his third executive order, that recognized that climate change is an urgent and existential threat that must be tackled immediately. And he called for us to do everything in our power to combat the effects of a changing climate and to ensure that our communities are as resilient as possible to rising sea levels and increasingly powerful storms. The specifics in Executive Order 3, our to-do list, first are that he continued and expanded the Governor's Council on Climate Change that was initiated in the prior administration. The Governor's Council on Climate Change, importantly, is meant to advise the Governor on the best policies that we can advance, both in mitigating or reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and also preparing our communities for climate change impacts. One really important hallmark of this council is it's not just a bunch of state commissioners, agency commissioners. This council is meant to be inclusive, consistent with the governor's vision of an open door and a big table. The membership of this council includes also our academic leaders. It includes membership of the business community, the insurance industry, as well as many of our stakeholder groups, our environmental groups. We're really excited to be able to continue and even expand the membership of the Governor's Council on Climate Change, including municipal representatives, so that we can have a policy direction that's informed for what the state can be doing in Hartford, but that is also elevating the best ideas and the ways that we can work together across the entire state of Connecticut. The Governor's Council on Climate Change will create mechanisms to evaluate what the state is doing to enact recommendations that were issued in 2018 for our state greenhouse gas mitigation plan. And it will be revamping the state's climate adaptation strategy, which will be due in 2020, at the end of 2020. Another really important aspect of the Governor's Council on Climate Change is that it includes membership that will be focusing on equity and environmental justice. This is a really critical consideration to both our mitigation and our adaptation planning efforts. We have to be thinking about how some communities are going to be disproportionately impacted by climate change, and also how many of the measures that we're undertaking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions we need to ensure that all communities are able to equitably participate and receive the benefits of those programs. So I'm excited about that focus as well. And then another important item in the executive order is that it directs DEEP to evaluate pathways to achieve a 100% zero carbon electric grid by 2040 as part of the state's integrated resources plan. You know, coming down here, of course, I was driving through Bridgeport, and you see, you know, the harbor there. You think about the impacts of Superstorm Sandy, which I think gave rise to a lot of the interagency coordination you see here today with SAFER and the Resilient Connecticut efforts. You know, I was at Pura at Deep and then at Pura, and for many years, in my focus and intersection with the impacts of that storm were around much of the electric infrastructure, the substations that were located right along the coast and that were minutes away from being flooded had the wind direction not shifted. And when you think about resilience and mitigation, sometimes we think of those as like two separate to-do lists, but many of our mitigation efforts are going to be focused on electrifying everything, how not just our lights and our appliances, but how we move and how we heat our homes. And so the importance of resilience for the electric grid is just illustrated by the efforts that are being undertaken now in Bridgeport to ensure that those substations that are surrounded by berms, that they can be raised up and moved, and that exercise of having to figure out what's the right standard, how high to move them, who should pay for that, are all issues that we had to grapple with just in responding to the wake of Superstorm Sandy. And so it previews a little bit of some of the work that we're going to be doing now under Executive Order 3 to bring both mitigation and adaptation strategies together. We are, the GC3 itself has a set membership and will meet a few times a year. A lot of the activity is going to be happening in two subcommittees. There will be a subcommittee on mitigation and a subcommittee on adaptation. So I'm telling you all this because I expect you to be getting engaged and showing up to all, and I'm letting you know all the opportunities that we have that we're hoping you'll participate, either coming to the meetings, bringing ideas. The subcommittees themselves will also be informed by a number of working groups. So this is where we expect a lot of the action and interaction to be occurring. We issued a notice a few weeks ago outlining some of the topics that we expect to tackle in those working groups. One will be focused on how to downscale the science to make it really actionable and understandable for planners. So that's our Science and Technology Working Group. We'll have another working group that will be focusing on assessing vulnerabilities in state assets and operations. There's great templates for this and examples that other states have undertaken that we'll be interested to follow along. It's really to start off to be able to inventory what are the expected impacts of climate change that state agencies need to be prepared for in our assets and operations, and then how do we go about identifying where those vulnerabilities are so that can start to inform our budgeting process. It can start to inform the design and engineering and the prioritization that we're giving to improvements to infrastructure as we go forward. We hope that tool also could be informative and adapted for municipalities to, if they're interested, to run similar exercises. So that's going to be a really exciting one for municipal engagement. Another big question is going to be around how do we pay for all of this? In the absence of having federal prioritization and really the large quantity sums that we're going to need, I think, ultimately to address this challenge, we have to be creative today to not miss this moment in 2019 before we've seen these impacts really hit us and hit our finances, to think about creative ways to incent market-based mechanisms, to incent the private market to be investing in adaptation and resilience and valuing that. How do we measure it and verify it so that those investors can have confidence in what they're putting their dollars to? How can we think about prioritizing state-level investment in a way that's accelerating a more adaptive and resilient infrastructure? So that question of financing will be another really exciting one. We're interested, as I mentioned, in equity and environmental justice. How do we engage communities on these opportunities? How we assess these vulnerabilities? There will be a working group on that. As well as working in natural lands. This has been a really exciting topic that we've seen a lot of good convening around. It's something that in our mitigation strategies that have been focused on buildings and transportation and the electric grid, we haven't spent as much time on those other sectors. And so I'm excited about the opportunity to engage that more in a working group on working in natural lands. So I give you all of that preview as a way to invite you to the table. Especially through those working groups, we're hoping to crowdsource the best ideas. We are looking for those will be time-limited, sort of task-oriented working groups that will be stood up to really try to inventory the best concepts and insights and cautionary tales and suggestions or pilot projects or things that we can spotlight That's what we're looking to do. Connecticut is the right size. This is a great state to work in because you really can get all the thought leaders in a room just like this. And we're looking to replicate that through this process. I will also put out the invitation that as I mention these different topics, there may be a conference that you're organizing. There may be a paper that you've read. There may be a speaker that you think is really dynamic. There may be another state or another town or a jurisdiction that you think has solved or tackled these issues in a really interesting way. We're looking for input like that as well, so that we can develop a good repository, we can establish, run webinars, we can think about co-convening some of these meetings. I don't want to have a Governor's Council on Climate Change that is parked at 79 Elm Street in Deep headquarters, but we really want to bring this conversation out to all the corners of the state and help to make it present in all of our different communities so that we can not only get the best ideas, but really generate more conversation about this topic. So with all of that, you can see my enthusiasm for this effort that we're going to be undertaking. We know it's going to be a lot of work, but at the end of the day, we're excited to be facilitating it at DEEP, and we're excited to be partnering with all of you in accelerating that. The degree of your engagement will be the test of how comprehensive, how workable, how usable this strategy will be for Connecticut. It's not just a DEEP strategy or a Governor Lamont strategy. It's going to be all of our strategies. And when we think about this, the urgency of this challenge, I hope it's something that we can all come together around. As we talk about this, we've all had these conversations thinking about the shutters that someone was mentioning before. I think we're confronting now, there's a fear of change, right? That is a barrier to people taking action or being ready to accept that we need to change and that our climate is changing, our environment is changing. But there's also a great relief in preparing and taking action that can help to counteract the anxiety and the fear that people have as we need them to orient to doing things differently. Progress is infectious. And finding those small steps and those small changes that people have already adapted to. Think about LED light bulbs, for example. It tells us that we can accept change, we can do things differently, and ultimately that will leave a better planet and a more resilient and safe environment and community for our kids and our grandkids, which is why we're all here today. So with that, I thank you for the time on this important agenda. I'm really glad that you all are here today and glad that I was able to take a few minutes to be part of it. So thank you.